for a second. Sorry about that. So I waited until my husband, Chris, and I were engaged before I invited him to my mom's extended family Christmas dinner. I think I wanted a little more commitment in the relationship before I had him experience that event. I think some of you might be able to relate to this. So my mom comes from a fairly large family. So our Christmas dinner is like 30 people smashed into my aunt's living room. And it's an overwhelming experience for anybody, especially a first-time visitor to this event. And so Chris shows up, and there's a lot of people and a lot of personalities to process, and there's that constant cacophony of conversation going on. And then he starts asking me questions like, why do you all eat your noodles on top of the mashed potatoes and then spread gravy on everything? Or why are there 15 different types of cookies for dessert? Or why does the youngest person of the family get to open all of their presents first before everybody else does? You know, questions I never thought to consider because I grew up in the family. That's how we always did it, right? We've always done it that way. But Chris comes in with all these questions from this new experience. And perhaps some of you can relate to this. I see some smiles and head nodding, right? Either you've been in Chris's shoes, or you've been a visitor or guest to a family dinner, or you've been in my shoes where you've invited a family guest to a dinner, and you understand how it can be a bit of an overwhelming or intimidating experience. And if you've ever had that experience, you have an idea of what it's like to visit a church for the very first time. Some of you have done this before, right? It can be a little intimidating or overwhelming to visit a church for the very first time. And so right now we're in the middle of this hospitality series that we're calling Open Doors to talk about how we can best use this strength, this gift of hospitality that we have as a congregation, and how we can best live into that as a church and for the world around us. So if you were here last week, I gave you this award of having some of the best interpersonal hospitality that I have ever seen in different churches that I have been a part of. And so we want to continue to talk about how can we use this gift. And today I want to specifically talk about how we can use this gift of hospitality specifically for first-time guests who come to Hope Church. Now, this is a very timely message, right? Because we are inviting people to come next Sunday for our Back to School Sunday and for our Celebration Sunday. But really, I think this is a relevant message for any church or any of us at different places and points in our lives of how we continue to be hospitable people. And so I want to begin by saying that any guest that God brings to Hope Church is a gift from God. That guests, and really all of us, are gifts from God. And let me just say, too, that I recognize there are literally 15 million other places you all could be right now this morning. And so it is a miracle that you all are here and chose to show up to be in worship today, because there's so many other things or places that you could be right now. And so any person who comes to Hope is really a gift from God. And I believe that God's Spirit is stirring in them, calling them to come to Hope Church. And we don't know why. We don't know their stories per se or what's going on in their lives. But each of us, as we come through those doors, is a gift from God. And that we at Hope are really like that family dinner where we are set every week expecting guests. That it's like we have that family table, we have empty seats, expecting people to come, to encounter God in this place. And we want to do the best that we can to extend hospitality to people. It's kind of like, picture maybe you invited me over to your home for a family dinner. And what are some things you might do? Well, you might greet me at the door. You might, if it's cold outside, take my coat or give me instructions about what to do with my shoes. You might lead me to a comfortable place to sit down. You might give me a beverage to drink or some food that you've cooked up. You do whatever you could to make me feel comfortable and safe and loved and welcomed in your home. And the same is true when it comes to the church, of how we can do our best to extend hospitality and welcome to people who come to Hope Church. So really, I want to highlight today 3 ways that we can do this. The first is how we greet guests and really everyone who comes to Hope Church. And I have realized that everything, literally everything, speaks to a first-time guest. So in today's world, our online presence is really the front door of many churches, right? Which is why we are working to try to increase and improve our online presence. And then from the moment somebody drives into our parking lot, they're already making observations, right? That's human nature. You can't really help that. So they're seeing how well kept? Is the facility, is it overgrown, or is it still neat and tidy? And that continues as they walk in the building. Does it look safe and clean and welcoming? So let me just pause for a moment and say thank you to a special group of you who volunteer countless hours every week to pull the weeds outside to make sure it's clean in here. I kind of refer to you in my head as like the magical fairy crew, because like it just happens. I don't even know how the weeds disappear or the cleaning happens, but I know it's not magic. It takes a lot of work. So thank you so much to those of you who do that. And if you would like to serve in that way, please let me know, because it's a blessing not just to people who come here every week, but especially also to our first-time guests. That's a way that we can serve together. So a first-time guest comes in, they're observing the facility, and then they also encounter our greeters, right? That's another incredible group of people who, when you serve as a greeter at the Welcome Center, you really are the face of God to all of us on a Sunday morning, right? We're coming in that door. Who knows what kind of week we've had? And when you smile and you say, good morning and welcome, that is a blessing to all of our lives, helping us feel welcome here in God's presence. I heard a story about a McDonald's in Manhattan that had a sign that said, we expect our employees to smile at you while they're taking your order. And if they don't smile at you, you're going to get a free order of fries or a small drink. And I was like, wow, if that level of welcome and hospitality is important to a McDonald's in Manhattan, how much more so is it important to us as a church welcoming people into God's family? So thank you, greeters, for the work that you do every week to help us feel welcome in this place. And if you'd like to serve in that way too, see Patty, she will help connect you. But thank you for that precious gift. So how we greet each other matters. The second is how we seat or direct people. Whenever you enter a space for the first time, you have questions, right? So I was at the West Shore YMCA this past week, and this random lady comes up to me and asks me if I know where the bathroom is, right? When you go to a space, you have questions like, where's the bathroom? Or if you have kids, is there a nursery? Is there a Sunday school? Where do I go to find those places? So how we seat and direct people matters. So it's awesome that we often have two greeters out here. So as a new person comes in, maybe one of you could offer to give a little mini tour to show where the bathrooms are, or the nursery, or the sanctuary, or talk about Sunday school and help bring them into the sanctuary and connect with people. I mentioned last week that when a person comes to church for the first time, they often decide within 10 minutes of whether or not they're ever going to return. And one of the big reasons that helps them decide of whether they're ever going to return is the other personal connections they make with other people in that congregation. And so our greeters help facilitate that, and thank you for the blessing that is. The third way is how our guests are treated. As I mentioned, everyone who comes to Hope Church is a gift from God. But we also don't know a person's story when they arrive. We don't know what kind of week they had. We also don't know what their previous church experience has been. You and I know that we live in a world that's more and more a post-Christian or post-church society, that we have these two growing groups of people that are sometimes referred to as the dones, the D-O-N-E-S, where they're just done with church. They might have grown up in the church, or they might have some church experience, but something happened in their life and they just decided, I'm done with church. I'm not really sure if I want to go back. And then we also have this growing group of nuns, N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. So nuns, N-O-N-E-S, that have no church experience. They didn't ever grow up in the church. They don't know much about the church. So for people in both of those groups to come to a church, to enter into the building for the very first time is a huge deal. And we don't know if they've been hurt by the church or if they had any church experience or what their story is. And so it's super important for us to treat them with an incredible level of hospitality so that they feel loved and welcome and safe here in the church. And this is important not just for us today, but it was really important to the early church. That the early church actually really struggled with trying to figure out how to welcome new people into the church, of who was welcome. We talked a little bit about this last week, that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi growing up in a Jewish home, and then he was really expanding that idea that we say right in John 3:16, for God so loved the world, not just the Jewish people, but the world, that all were welcome as a part of God's family. And that was radical. welcome Gentiles or non-Jews into the church was huge. Because at the time the early church was born, it was actually illegal for a Jewish person to marry a non-Jew. And in fact, if a Jewish person married a non-Jew, a funeral was held for that Jewish person because they were seen as dead to their faith community for choosing to marry somebody outside of their faith tradition. Or it was also illegal for a Jewish woman to help aid a non-Jewish woman in childbirth because she was helping to bring another non-Jew into the world. That's the deep division between Jews and Gentiles at the time of the early church. And so for Jesus and for the early church to say that all were welcome was absolutely radical at the time. And it was something the early church struggled with. And so I want us to look at this in Ephesians chapter 2, beginning in verse 12. Remember that you were at that time without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenant promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he is our peace. In his flesh he has made both groups into one, and has broken down the dividing walls, that is, the hostility between us, between the Jews and the Gentiles. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances. He has created that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace, and might reconcile both groups to God in one body through the cross, thus putting to death that hostility through it. So he came and proclaimed peace to you who are far off and peace to you who are near. For through him both of us have access to one Spirit, to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are citizens with the saints and also members of the household, the family of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the cornerstone. In him the whole structure is joined together and grows into the holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also built together spiritually into the dwelling place for God. This is such a powerful passage as it speaks about the Jews and the Gentiles being brought together. That no matter the differences that separate and divide us, we are one in God's Spirit. That there are no strangers, no outsiders or outcasts in the family of God, but that we are all brought near through the love of Jesus. And that is so powerful to me because, I don't know about you, but there are times in my life when I've felt like a stranger, right? When I felt like an outcast or outside. And maybe you've had that experience. Maybe at different points in time in your life or in your own church experience you felt that way. But it's my hope and prayer that that would never happen here. That we would feel strangers or outsiders, but that we would feel connected and loved and valued as part of the household, the family of God. And as I've been reflecting upon this passage, I realized how important it is for our world today. Because I don't know about you, but it's really hard to not consume a news article that isn't just about hype or hatred or hostility. It seems almost every news item or article out there is somehow about hype or hatred or hostility. And I don't know about you, but I'm getting frustrated and tired and bogged down of all the hype and hatred and hostility. And I'm thinking to myself, what is the antidote? Is there an antidote to this? Is there anything different than this? And I think the antidote is hope. That hope is the antidote to the hatred and hostility and hype in our world. That hope is really the gift the church can offer the world. I love our name as Hope Church because literally if there's any organization or institution, whatever word we want to use, body of people in the world that offers hope, it should be the church. That we are called to be ambassadors of hope. And you could call us naive and simplistic, or you could call us bold and courageous to say that we have hope. That we have hope for a better future. That we have hope for brighter days. That we have hope that this life is not all there is. That one day we will be united with God and one another, and there'll be no more sorrow, no more suffering, no more pain. We have hope in new life. We have hope for broken marriages to be restored. We have hope for broken relationships to be brought back together. We have hope for God to mend the broken pieces of our life. This is the hope we have in Jesus Christ, and it is the antidote to a world filled with hostility and hype. And so, church, the world needs us to be ambassadors of hope. And so whether you extend that hope in pulling weeds or cleaning or serving as a greeter or inviting someone to our upcoming celebration and back to school Sunday, or even if you just live as a hopeful presence this week in your life, that is my prayer for you. That we together would be ambassadors of hope to a world that desperately needs it.